Coaching as Benevolence, a podcast for people who are curious about using coaching for self-development. I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings Grief and Loss Coaching.
And I'm L'Shawn with Michelle Sage Place Positive Intelligence Coaching.
We are back this week with our third prompt from our guided journal that was newly published. As a reminder, it is named A Guided Journal to Live Your Best Life. That's the subtitle. And then the actual title is Coaching Nuggets of Wisdom to Inspire, Explore, Act, Flourish. And each of those four, Inspire, Explore, Act, Flourish, are different sections within the journal, and we're starting with Inspire. So we're on week 3 of Inspire, and we're taking you through the journal prompt by prompt each week to have conversations that show up authentically in the space, not scripted about these prompts, but to better understand how L'Shawn and I both can process these prompts for our own well-being and our own support, and also provide insight for our listeners, especially to show a little bit more about our lines of thinking when we were drafting this journal over the past year. So I'm going to read prompt 3 here, and it says, how do you define congruence? Congruence is when our hearts and our minds are aligned, when they work together simultaneously, inspiring us to live fully and experience completely. When our passion, mission, and purpose in life are congruent, we can achieve and experience amazing things. We live in a state of ease and flow, driven by inspiration. What does congruence feel like? If you were to paint congruence, what would it look like? How does it feel when your mind and heart align? I enjoyed reading this aloud because I like how it goes from defining congruence to really feeling into what that is felt like within oneself and what that looks like, and having this imagery of even painting that as a response to this prompt and how helpful that might be. So, L'Shawn, as I read this prompt 3, what was resonating with you?
So many things. Just the word congruent, something about it really resonates with me. It's the reminder how powerful I feel and how powerful things can be when things are congruent, just how things flow easily when I'm congruent, like when my heart, my mind, my purpose are aligned. And it reminded me of that because I have been the opposite of congruent. I've just not been congruent. And reading this prompt, hearing you read this prompt also has given me, has inspired me to take some time to think about what that looks like, and even do an inventory of what I've been doing from the beginning of the year till now. I mean, now we're in the second quarter, and just the first quarter, I think, was a lot of like scrambling and reacting. And there wasn't a lot of, there was some purpose and intention. However, it wasn't congruent. And so this prompt helps me get grounded in the idea of congruence. And I'm excited to explore what that looks like and how I can realign myself and get more in step with my purpose and in step with like the deeper things, the things that really matter, and be more intentional, and also kind of zoom out and take a bigger picture look at my life. I think that will be more encouraging than just looking at all the things that I have to do and the scrambling and the challenges, and zoom out, just getting a bigger picture perspective of my life and settling into a more intentional way of being. How about you, Eryn? What's coming up for you?
I love the connection you make between congruence and living intentionally. So that was really resonating with me as you were speaking. And then as I remember like going through this prompt and then speaking this prompt and then sitting here in this space, I just see that like heart, mind, there's a thread connecting them where the heart is feeding the mind. And there's a lot of energy flowing between the sources. And it's like this bright positive energy is what it kind of comes to mind when I'm thinking of the heart-mind connection here. Congruence is tricky at the macro level, right? Because it feels like we at the micro level don't get enough opportunity to sit with congruence or to even understand its meaning, not only within us, but between people and between countries and things like that. So I don't know. I feel like congruence is always a word that's a call to take a pause at least, or take an inventory. And that makes a lot of sense in this part of our journal being the third prompt and the first part of the journal in the inspire section. This is all about taking that intentional time to not only feel inspired, but have aligned ideas about what aligned action could look like moving forward throughout this guided journal when it finally gets to that action process. And I think when we sit with simply the word congruence, that is a good word to help us get aligned with what it is we do want to take action on moving forward too. And like all the other prompts, these are so multi-layered, because for me, it's like congruence shows up within myself in that heart-mind imagery, but it's also within relationships or career, leisure. Like, how does this all fit into one's life? And congruence takes up space for all of those little different areas of one's life. And so I think that this is a prompt that will provide a little more understanding about maybe what congruence looks like when we're sitting at home. What does congruence look like when we're sitting in the workplace, when we are going through hard times? What's it look like when things are going well? Like, I don't know. I just think there's so much to consider with that word. And right now for me, I kind of, I said I was content in our last week podcast. And now I'm like, okay, this takes me a little bit deeper to really understand, am I fully content? Because there is levels of congruence within my life that seem a little bit off kilter or out of line. So I'm glad that we've included this at the beginning of this, the journal, to help people sit with these things that really will inspire them to create more meaningful change in their lives. And so I'm curious, what our listeners are thinking about and feeling about as they read this prompt and respond to this prompt, and how they even define congruence. We define congruence as our minds and our hearts are aligned, but I think just even alignment is a good synonym. And then how other parts of not only our hearts and minds, but other parts of our lives being aligned too. I haven't had a chance to really look into, what is the definition of congruence based off of like Merriam-Webster dictionary. Of course, that's not the most helpful definition as I click through this. It's the quality of or state of agreeing, coinciding, or being congruent. So let me find something else, maybe a little more nuanced here. The quality of being similar to or in agreement with something. So we have similar, agreement, alignment, kind of those keywords. And then it's interesting because there's different examples on the Cambridge Dictionary about how congruence is used. And one of them just says, instead of trying to force ourselves to be calm, she says, we should be getting excited due to a psychological something called arousal congruence. So, even our emotional state being in alignment with congruence as well. So I think when we were initially working on this, we looked up different meanings of the word congruence, but I really do like the additional layering in here of how that relates specifically to inspiration and our heart and mind alignment.
Yeah, I love what you said about the different aspects of our life what does congruence look like in different aspects of our life? And as you were talking about that, I was thinking about the metaphor, and I think this is Buddhist, the idea that our essence, our spirit is like water, and it takes the shape of whatever container it inhabits. So when you were talking about what does congruence look like when I'm just sitting at home, what does congruence look like when I'm working? And I was thinking of the image of water and how water takes the shape of the river that it's flowing in, or the bottle that it's in, or the glass that it's in. But the essence of it doesn't change. And that to me is what congruence feels like to me. It's this sense of flow this sense of ease where there's no resistance, or that is just a state of flowing. It's like being in a flow state, but that you're moving with whatever is happening in the moment. So, for example, if you're at home relaxing with your family, or you're relaxing reading a book, or whatever you're doing at home, that's something that you just flow into. If you're at work and you have to take decisive action, lots of things are happening, deadlines need to be met, you flow into that. It's not like it's not like there's not this frenzied feeling. And let me just speak for myself. The way that I feel like when I am at home and there's congruence there's this sense of ease, and there's a sense of acceptance and being open to connection to what's happening, being present. When I'm at work and there's congruence, there's a sense of decisiveness, a sense of, leadership, a sense of, because of my role in my work, a sense of things are getting done, collaboration, productivity. If I'm looking at congruence in a social setting, there is also a sense of moving and flowing with the pace of the group, and this openness and curiosity. When there's congruence there's openness and curiosity. When there's not congruence there's fear and anxiety. Like, what do I say and how do I say it? And am I listening and am I checking out? This thing. But when there's congruence there, I'm like flowing. There's joy, there's openness. So those are the things to kind of go through your questions and answering your questions there, your hypotheticals there about what does congruence look like in these different aspects. How about you, Eryn? What does congruence look like in different aspects of your life?
Well, something you said really stood out to me about what it doesn't look like. It's making decisions from fear and anxiety, right? So when you said that, it felt just very like a light bulb moment going off in terms of, okay, so we know congruence feels like alignment and a little bit flowy and a little bit receptive and things. We know congruence isn't based out of fear or anxiety necessarily. And what does that mean too? So that really stood out to me. And then I think with the congruence, when you're talking about it in like your family situation, your work situation, a part of that congruence is aided by that self-awareness, and then that maybe some breath work that's going on in the moment, and knowing, maybe our own wants and needs in those situations. And so that goes back to this heart and mind alignment. And I just think that one of the tools that I take away from this that I haven't been doing personally, but I want to try, is when I'm in different situations that might be a little higher stress, whether those are work or family or anything, envisioning that heart and mind with that thread alignment and breathing into that, right? And just like really creating space for myself to kind of step into congruence in those moments where I typically would, if I like really reflected, not be in congruence at all. I'd be in fight or flight, or any one of those fawn or freeze, about all of them, or I might be in kind of just like that, with that freeze piece, unable to respond as my authentic self because of fear or because of other things. So I think congruence is a word to step into in any challenging social situation that would help people, I think, feel empowered to say what they need to say within their heart and mind, or to listen well, or to fully experience what's going on in the conversation, in the, place of it all. And so, so going back to your question, what does congruence look like, for me? Today is rough because I know I do not feel as congruent as I have been feeling. And so it's almost like I know what it doesn't feel like. And yet I was feeling so congruent last week. And it's just so interesting what a difference a few days does when it shifts, how it can shift us, or in my case, shift me. And last week, when I think back to how he's feeling really congruent, I was feeling at ease, engaged, curious. And today I'm just feeling really tired and almost like my body needs a rest. And I just don't feel as congruent. So tackling this topic when I don't feel congruent feels hard, which I want to acknowledge too, I guess, with our listeners. They might get to this third prompt in the journal about congruence and just be like, that's not where I'm at today, or that's, not me right now, or whatever it may be. So I think there's a lot of ways to approach that. Then number 3, with this prompt, you could journal about what it's not potentially, and that might give you more clarity. You can always skip prompts. Yes, it's a guided journal that goes in order, but there's nothing wrong with skipping things and going back to them at a later time. And you can always revisit what you have written so far about your first and second prompts and how that relates to this third prompt as well. I'm looking forward. I think that's all I have to say. I think that's where I'm at. Yeah.
I love that you mentioned, and I appreciate your transparency and, in sharing that you don't feel congruent right now. So it's really difficult to access that fully when you don't feel congruent. And I think that's also something that's also information that's really important as well, in terms of knowing what it's like when you're not congruent. And I also experience the same thing. When I don't feel congruent, when there's not that alignment, when I'm misaligned, there's definitely a lot of I have frenzied energy, like frenzied energy. I feel very scattered. I get brain fog, like I can't think. And like I sit and I like try to piece things together, and my processing is super, super slow. So when things are not congruent, that's what it's like for me. And then so that's a way for me to take a moment and be like, okay, not congruent. And Eryn, you spoke to these tools that we can use to help us get into a space where we can find congruence, and breathing is definitely one of them. So as you were talking about the breathing tool that we have to breathe and how important it is, and I was thinking about what is it like when I'm not, there's not congruence there. This is like very shallow breathing, almost like kind of hyperventilating. then when I can like take the time to take a deep breath, and I can slow down. And then as I'm breathing in and inhaling and opening, expanding the lungs, and then exhaling, where there's this sense of release that comes with exhaling. And then there's a sense of slowing down, and I can look around and I can get grounded and understand, although certain things need to get done, I have time, it's not happening now. And if it is happening now, again, I can break it down into steps, like let's do this first and then this and then this, but let's focus on the thing that needs to get done now as opposed to the whole thing, and so that helps me kind of move more intentionally and also slower. I think there's a sense of needing to slow down, and that to me invites congruence. And so going back to what you said, Eryn, about just not feeling congruent and feeling tired and getting that message that your body is needing rest, listening to our bodies, listening to where we are, and being okay with that, and giving ourselves grace. And realizing that then brings in the idea that congruence is fluid, that it comes and it goes, that there are times when we're congruent and there's times when we're not. And when congruence is absent, then we know that there are certain things that need to be in place in order to feel a certain way, and we know what's lacking or missing, and so we can find our way back to that. So I think it's important to have moments where you are out of alignment so that you can know what that's like. Not only do you know that you have and you are capable of alignment, when you can recognize yourself out of alignment, it means that you have experienced alignment. And so that's just information that you are capable of that and you can get back into it. And it gives you a chance to ask those questions, like what is present that allows me to be aligned. For me, it's, sleep, getting enough sleep. It's diet as well, in terms of like eating nourishing foods as opposed to foods that are not as nourishing. And it's giving myself grace as well. Like those are things that need to be present in order for me to get into alignment and to feel that I'm in alignment and to stay in alignment. How about you, Eryn? What are some conditions that need to be in place in order for you to feel that congruence and that alignment?
I love the fluidity that you mentioned congruence is fluid, and then you went on to nuance that so beautifully. And like, we don't always have congruence, and then when we do, we better understand what it is because we know from what we don't in some ways. And I love how you said that so eloquently. And yeah, I'm trying to think of like, were there larger periods of time in my life where congruence was just more stable than, just thinking about it on the day to day where it might fluctuate back and forth. And I think that's a good question for our readers to ask themselves too, because then they can maybe see what was going on during that time of their life. And of course, things could have been significantly different, right? Could have been before having kids or whatever it might have been. And so it may be hard to fully compare those. But are there larger time gaps where congruence has been more present than not? And really for me, I think that it has been more since, I've turned 40, like that age bracket for me, I feel like has been more congruent in a lot of ways. And then also when I was writing my book, like, or just writing in general, that feels very congruent in a state of flow. And that was a multi-year project. And so now that I don't have that, maybe that's one of the pieces of congruence that I'm lacking in some capacities, is like, okay, what is my creative outlet here? And what does that look like? And of course, this journal has been another example of that. And I really enjoyed it. But it doesn't mean that congruence always has to come from this flowery creation process or creative process either. So bringing that back down to myself for like in the day to day, what you said about accepting where we're at. So like, yeah, my body doesn't feel good. I feel a little bit under the weather today, like headache, just really tired. So instead of feeling guilty for not doing as much or feeling certain things that we tend to feel, and I certainly am feeling today because of my health not being that great today. It's just that gentle reminder of like asking, well, where is congruence here? Or where could it be here? Or where could it show up here? And it doesn't have to. This may be a day where things just aren't going to go great. And that's okay too. And so I kind of see it, congruence being such a good journal prompt to work with, both from that day-to-day level, what's going on day to day, all the way out to that larger picture, 5+ years of life sections. And maybe there's more congruence in certain ones. And why is that? And so it's a really fun one to play around with. And I think that could be really enjoyable for people who like to journal beyond the prompt, looking at congruence in different periods of their lives as well. I think that takes us to our coaching nugget of wisdom, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
You have one, L'Shawn?
Well, yeah, actually, one thing.
Oh gosh, so sorry.
No worries.
It doesn't take us to our coaching nuggets of wisdom. This takes us to our call to action during our journal series, where we're talking through each of the prompts instead of a coaching nugget of wisdom, because those are built into the prompts. We are doing a call to action. So this takes us to our call to action section of our podcast.
So our call to action, my call to action would be the last part of the prompt. It ends with some questions. And one of them is, if you were to paint congruence, what would it look like? The inspiration behind that question is seeing congruence outside of, just writing. Could be dancing, movement, closing your eyes and imagining a place that looks like congruence. So my call to action would be to step out of the page and bring that into your body. Embody congruence. How can you embody congruence in the next week or two?
I love that. And I think I want to go back to that heart and mind alignment. What does heart and mind alignment look like for you in relationship to congruence? And how does that feel? And what does that inform for you moving forward?
Thanks for joining us for Coaching as Benevolence. I'm L'Shawn with Michelle's Sage Place, Positive Intelligence Coaching.
And I'm Eryn with Roots and Wings, Grief and Loss Coaching.
Have a benevolent day.